did you get on? What I've done, I've just gone onto the Active People survey from Sport England, and I've drawn out the results from the task that I set you. So it may not come as any surprise to you that swimming comes out top. However, it may be a surprise to you that football is a close second, really. And then you've got golf, and you've got exercise, movement and dance, with badminton propping up the rest. Now, what is very interesting there, though, is the percentages at the top of each bar. You'll notice that they are very low percentages. So only 5.68% of the female participation 16 plus took part in swimming in the last week. So some of those percentages are quite alarming when you compare them to male sport. Looking at the information in a little bit more detail then, it tells us that 7.12 million females aged 16 years or over, that's 31.7%, played sport once a week. This is a 112,400 more than in the Active People Survey 9, which is last year's, but 14,700 fewer than the 2012 result, when it actually peaked during the life cycle of the Active People Survey. During this period, 7.51 million females aged 14 and over, that's 31.6% of the female population, had played sport once a week. These should be the baseline figures that we refer to now for this module if you're going to be referring to female participation. Looking at the leadership and workforce elements of sport now, and the representation of females within the more leadership or administrative roles within sport. And it makes for some very interesting reading. There are some real issues getting more women into sport in areas of governance and leadership. Trophy Women is a annual report that's produced by Women in Sport website, and it provides a checklist for change and provides core elements to which sports organisations should aspire. So 2 key areas: how to better involve more women on the board, so in effect governance, and then sourcing and fostering female talent throughout sports organisations. So let's look at some of the data that's been provided in that report. It tells us that 49% of Sport England funded and national governing bodies have less than a quarter of their board membership made up of women. So try and refer back to the makeup of the FA's board, for example, and how many women are represented on that board. And you may know or understand the makeup of your local county FA or regional FA, and just try and think about how many females are represented on their boards or committees. Over a quarter of boards surveyed reported a lower percentage of women on their boards compared to that in the prior year. Only 23% of national governing body chief executives were actually female. 11% of national governing body chairs were female. 33% of national governing body development directors were female, and only 18% of national governing body performance directors were female. Now, when the population is around about 50-50 across the UK, then those statistics make for interesting reading, don't they? So it tells us that the male population far outweigh the female population when it takes up those positions higher up in national governing bodies and key sporting organisations. So this next graphic is pulled off from the Active People Survey 10 and provides us with an overview of female participation one times 30 a week over the last, or since the Active People Survey began back in 2006. So this is the information that we're interested in as a baseline for this module. So we're looking at participation. So let's have a look at the data. Well, just by the line graph, you'll be able to see that actually there's not been a huge step change in female participation over the last 10 years. However, one thing that you may be able to notice is that it did dip in 2011. However, there was a real upsurge there of over 2% increase in participation in 2012. Now, what happened in 2012 in the UK? Well, yes, you may have guessed it. It's the Olympics. So was that the Olympic effect that actually had a real upsurge in participation? And you'll notice towards the right-hand side of the graph, actually, now we're getting right back up to that, to those high points back in 2012, where we now have 31.7% of females partaking in sport. So despite the increased funding in female participation or female sport to try and get more females into active sport, there doesn't seem to be a huge upshift in participation figures. It's also important for us to understand how females partake in sport. So what types of activity? Certainly if we're going to address any of these drop-offs, so if you're going to be working in the industry and working in the female game, you need to understand what activity females currently playing sport do. This next graphic, or these next three graphics, have a breakdown of individual sport, 1-versus-1, and team sports. So an individual sport might be, for example, an exercise class. So again, not huge change over the surveys from 2006 to 2016. However, there has been incremental progress. And again, we're getting up close to the height of the post-2012 statistic there. But still a very low percentage rate of just under 30%. But that's individual sports such as exercise classes or rhythmic classes. Now we have 1v1 sports, such as racket sports could be, such as tennis, badminton, table tennis. And this makes for very interesting reading, whereby there has been a real decline in activity for 1-versus-1 activity over the past 10 years. And also pay particular attention to the percentages on each of those dots on that graph, whereby they're considerably lower than individuals. So when we talked about just under 30% played individual sports, only just over 2% play 1v1 sports. And those females partaking in team sports are, in 2016, just under 2%. And again, that's been a steady decline over the last 10 years. So some really interesting reading there. And what we can conclude from looking at the analysis is that females tend to take up lifestyle sports. So things that can fit in around their lifestyle, as opposed to those team activities when they need to bring people together to partake in sport themselves.